Good afternoon. This is the Lew Rockwell Show, and how great to have as our guest today Professor Michael Rectenwald. Mike, you were a very important professor at NYU, professor of liberal studies, professor of global liberal studies. You taught at Duke University and other universities. And all of a sudden, you were, in effect, forced out of the university, or at least your life made very miserable by your fellow faculty members and by the left-wing students. Tell us what happened and how that all came about.
Yeah, I would say that my life became completely untenable due to the hostility and the way I was completely marginalized and driven out of the department that I worked in. I started a Twitter account called Anti-PC NYU Prof. And it was anonymous at first. I started tweeting about, it was 2016, and NYU had just introduced a new technique or technology called the bias reporting hotline, which encouraged students and faculty, but especially students, to report on faculty or each other if somebody committed a quote-unquote bias infraction or microaggression. Never was any of this defined, not even bias. But once you reported this, it was sent to a bias response team who adjudicated behind closed doors whatever this infraction might be. They also were pressing on Twitter what they call the trigger warnings to put those on syllabi, so that if there was something on a syllabi that you were going to study that might be emotionally or otherwise triggering to students, you're supposed to list that. There was the institution of safe spaces, the whole thing, and it was just getting crazy. There was no platforming. They were driving speakers off campuses. This started earlier, but at NYU it had just occurred with Milo Yiannopoulos, who was driven off campus because somebody might walk past the room and hear what he was saying that might trigger them. So it looked like, to me, and I think I was prescient in this, to me, it looked like we were starting to institute a Stasi state in the university system, and that it was getting completed through all these different technologies. This was becoming a surveillance state. And furthermore, it was getting extremely illiberal. So I started to comment about all this and on there, and somebody from the New York University student newspaper contacted me and asked me if I was really an NYU professor, and if so, would I mind doing an interview? And I said, I'll do the interview. I'm not sure I'll go on the record. After I did the interview, to my estimation, I had said nothing obscene or otherwise like objectionable or deplorable. I had made a criticism of these things and the social justice warriors and the way that their ideology was now becoming official in university policy. They were dominating the entire policy of the university, and this was going on everywhere. As it turned out, that year turned into a complete craziness. By the end of the semester in the spring of 2017, they were burning down the campus at Berkeley. I mean, this just progressed. Evergreen took place also. I was ahead of the curve, I think, and they were calling me crazy because I was seeing things that they didn't see, because they didn't pay attention, partly. They were very provincial in their outlook, some of the people. But I got attacked within 2 days of that interview appearing. I was called into the dean's office, and lo and behold, the head of human resources for the division of the college was also suddenly appeared. I didn't know that she would be there. And they started basically this thing where they started suggesting that, that there was something wrong with me, that I must be mentally ill, that people were worried about me, and they were worried about my mental health. And I was like, what are you talking about? This is just a ruse to try to drive me out of the campus. And no, we assure you that it's not. They strong-armed me into a leave of absence. Now, people say, well, you didn't have to do it, and why didn't you tape it and all this? Well, I didn't, I really didn't have I wasn't prophetic enough to think about taping it. I didn't know what was going to happen in there. I didn't think it had. He said, first of all, he started off by saying, I want you to know this discussion has nothing to do with your Twitter account or the recent publicity you've been getting over it. I said, oh.
Yeah.
And then it struck me as a complete fabrication, because usually when somebody says something like that, it's quite the opposite. It's the opposite is the case. It's usually why they're saying it. So, I was up for promotion to full professor, and it was long delayed, the decision. It was stringing out since April. This was now October, and they still hadn't made their decisions. And that was a big deal to me. I was set to get an increase in rank from assistant to full professor in one fell swoop. So that on the line, and the pressure and everything else, it's insinuated to me that I better do it. So I took the leave, and then lo and behold, that same day, after I had accepted the leave, this open letter by this committee established just that fall called the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Group slammed me in an open letter, calling me guilty for the structure of my thinking. And by the way, they called me incivil, which is ironic in light of what they and their mobs would do later in terms of the language they would use on me, which I had, by the way, never criticized an individual. They said I was guilty of ad hominem attacks. I never mentioned a person by name, so apparently they didn't know what ad hominem meant. They were just utterly, completely crazy, and they said I was guilty for the structure of my thinking, i.e., was a thought criminal, and they were suggesting that I was low on the moral hierarchy, but it wasn't because I was a white straight male. So I went on the paid leave. When I got back, I was completely shunned. We had over like 100 faculty members full time in our department. Mm-hmm. Every one of them shunned me. Not only that, by the end of the semester, I got this series of emails came out of the blue, uninitiated by me by any stretch. I didn't say anything to anybody. They started attacking me, and then it grew into like a snowball where there was like 5 or 6 people just blistering attacks, calling me everything from alt-right to Satan to the Nazi to a short pants white devil, whatever the hell that means. And just going on and on. I mean, full caps, screaming stuff, and I never stooped to their level. I never used any epithets towards them. Oh, they were calling me a sexist and a racist. Wow, they pelted me with racism and sexist language. So it's very typical. There's something wrong with the mentality of these people in terms of their projection and so forth. So I just answered them very, very calmly and said, this is unwarranted, and it's completely off base, and I'm not addressing these crazy slurs. There's absolutely no basis in fact for any of it. I'd never expressed anything of the sort. So they moved me to the Russian department after that, which was a supreme poetic irony, because what? The Russian collusion delusion was under full effect. And I got there, and it was like I had been moved in my own personal gulag. The office was like barren, no books, because they refused to move my books, which was almost a mile away. So I couldn't do it myself, and there were too many. And I had lived in there with like empty metal bookshelves, no sign on the door, no access to any secretarial or other services. I couldn't even print something. I had no access to the printer, nothing. Couldn't copy anything. I had no account, nothing. I was completely isolated and stuck in a corner. And then the hostility all around was just insane. So I sued that batch of people that had slandered me, libeled me, and my attorneys were on a contingency basis. They could not really overcome the motion to dismiss, because they had an army of lawyers stacked up against us and just came up with all these absurd hurdles. So they just couldn't answer it. But nevertheless, I ended up negotiating an exit, and it wasn't the greatest, but it was better than being there, actually. So that's basically how it goes. So what's to be drawn from that we could talk about.
Well, Michael, the one thing that's happened as a result of what happened to you are the two books that you've written most recently, Springtime for Snowflakes, Social Justice and Its Postmodern Parentage, and then your most recent book, which has to be one of the great titles ever, The Google Archipelago, The Digital Gulag, and the Simulation of Freedom. So this book, I think especially, is accurate in describing the situation that we're all in, not just
Right.
you as a professor at NYU, but really we're all at risk from it. And talk to us about the Google Archipelago, if you would.
Yeah, sure. And I'll explain how I, segued from the Springtime for Snowflakes book, which was a examination of my own situation that I just referred to, and also I went in deep dive into the roots of social justice. And I found that this ideology actually is the same one that permeates the entire cyberspace. That in fact, Google and Facebook, the whole, basically what I call big digital, they're all operating with the same ethos and the same what I think is a leftist authoritarianism, and they're policing the cyberspace in the same way that the university was policing aberrant or deviant or dissident language and statements. And so the same authoritarianism I saw operating, and then I was vindicated because in the middle of writing the book, the Google Whistleblowers Act Voorhees came out and showed all this documentation, and everything verified exactly what I was saying. They're biased, they're steering, they're manipulating data, there's all this shaming and silencing and disappearing of different people based on their having the wrong viewpoint. And I don't mean just so-called supremacy, but anything that really isn't leftist gets downgraded, blacklisted, deranked, debunked. All these things are happening. And I could get into the technology and details in terms of how they're doing it coding-wise, but it seemed to me that what is happening is the same thing. It's kind of what I call a digital gulag, as the subtitle suggests. There is a gulag system in a sense that as the gulag served as a place to disappear dissidents, as it served as a surveillance system, as it served as a punitive system, as it served as a disciplinary censorship system of censorship, so indeed the Google Archipelago, of which Google is the main emblem but not the entirety, serves to do the same in cyberspace. And furthermore, because the digital realm has become the basic forum or venue for any kind of meaningful, efficacious discourse or argumentation or anything, presentation or self-presentation and social existence almost, they have made it such that everything else is basically irrelevant. You don't go stand on a corner on a soapbox in a park anymore unless you want to be called a lunatic. There's no public square elsewhere, so for the most part. So it is effectively a statist apparatus. And without having the obligations of the state in some cases, as supposedly in the United States, which of course is contradicted anyway, but nevertheless, at least on paper, suggesting that we have certain rights. This does not apply to Google or Facebook or Twitter or any of the digital giants. They have complete, as private corporations, putatively, they have complete and total. They have no obligation to follow any of the First Amendment or allow free speech or free expression at all. So that's basically the idea, and I go into what I think are the politics of the whole apparatus and what they're after, and what kind of objectives they're really striving for. And I think everything is pretty clear. Some of it is speculative and it's an extrapolation from where they are, but nevertheless, with the existence of these smart cities in China, there's 50 of them at least. They're spreading to the west. It's been adopted in some cities like Darwin, Australia. And there's a huge consortium in Europe that's going to implement the same things there. We're talking about a digital surveillance system that will not be just on the internet, but will be everywhere. It'll be ambient. That is, you'll be in the internet in effect, because everything will become data. Your personal self, your corporal selfhood will have a digital signature that can be tracked. That is, every move would be known, basically. And in fact, inside the house, if the Internet of Things becomes as ubiquitous as proposed. That's basically the idea.
Michael, is there anything to be done about it? Or are we all just doomed to this is our future?
No, I mean, I would never write a book that I thought was a fait accompli if there was no hope. And in fact, the book is meant to be premonitory and to give us a warning and to suggest, listen, we have to counter this, because the problem is that the narrativity of the digital realm in connection with mass media, the possibility is for them to completely control all narratives, or then, the master narrative, if you will, and to make others basically either considered crazy or else just completely gone. So the main task, as I see it, first, besides legal mechanisms that might be undertaken and so forth, is to counter these narratives strenuously, because the only way that they're going to be subject to skepticism and criticism and so forth is by virtue of countering them with better narratives, that is, more truth-based narratives than they are using.
And a good deal of that is already going on.
Yes, I agree. It is. And unfortunately, like today, for example, YouTube put into effect new user rules that are going to even be more censorious and censoring than the previous set. They have widened the scope of what they're calling harm. So anything that they deem as harmful can be banned. Anything that they deemed to be hateful is banned. Now, here's an interesting thing that I think your listeners will especially relate to. YouTube's hate speech or rules have a list of the categories that can't be denigrated, or the persons can't be denigrated in those categories. I agree with the categories. The only thing missing is class. In other words, there's no mention of the great fact that the greatest political tyranny and destruction and horror has been perpetrated by people not in the name of supremacy, but in the name of equality.
That's right.
These are the people that are most dangerous, and they have been historically the most dangerous. They killed more people. Now, I agree that the premise of their murder was maybe different, but they killed 100 million people, as the Black Book of Communism makes clear. And they also imprisoned a hell of a lot more. So, I mean, this is amazing that this leftist totalitarianism is never criticized, and they're never held accountable. So they say that you can't, for example, deny, mass murders. Nevertheless, they have you go over and search on YouTube, and you see that there are numerous Maoist groups that are apologizing for Mao and saying that the claims of Mao's mass murders and whether through famine or otherwise are false, and there's all kind of promotion of Maoism all over the place. No problem there. They don't bother them at all. So that's very curious, I think.
No, and the same is true with Stalin's crimes. I mean, there are scholars at Yale and other places who say that this is all pretty much a myth, that his people murdered quite as many as they did.
Yeah, so that makes me wonder, I was a leftist, and I was under the leftist ideology, so I understand kind of like from the inside out exactly how it works, and in terms of what the subject of that ideology thinks and how they think of things. And one of the main premises of leftism is that the leftist is always the underdog, is always downtrodden, is always cast out, is always marginalized, is always debased, is always suppressed and oppressed and so forth. But the interesting fact is as you just noted, major universities in this country house thousands of Marxist scholars who are not only not denigrated as they would if they were Nazis, which they should be if they were, but are celebrated. And incredibly, there's no criticism of this, in fact. So leftism not only is not downtrodden or marginalized, it's the dominant ideology. So that's one of the premises of the book as well.
Well, it sounds tremendous. I mean, it sounds like I don't have my copy yet, but it sounds like a book we all absolutely need to read.
Thank you. I think it does a good job. There's a couple chapters in there that might throw the readers off. I have a fictional interlude in the middle of the book, which traces a fictional Soviet defector who had been imprisoned in the Gulag and becomes U.S. He moves to the U.S., ends up moving to what becomes Silicon Valley, and ends up in the digital Gulag after escaping the Soviet system. So anyway, that's just a little bit of what I do that for, and I try to explain this in the intro, is to give people a sense that we're not talking about something that can be conveyed strictly through argumentation. It's experiential. So I try to give a sense of the experience of this through this fictional character.
Michael, you're tremendous. You're a hero. I mean, there are a lot of people, and I know some people that this has happened to, have had maybe not as bad, but similar experiences at universities that you went through, and it sort of wrecked them. I mean, they just weren't able to work afterwards, and that was sort of the end of their life. They're still alive, but I mean, they're not sort of the end of their intellectual life. You fought back, very just tremendously effectively, and we all owe you a debt of gratitude. Everybody who is worried about what's going on, everybody who maybe has been a victim of it, we all are very grateful to you.
Thank you very much, Lew. I really appreciate it because while I haven't been destroyed and I will not be silenced, and I don't believe that the Academy is the only exclusive domain for intellectual and historical and other inquiry. In fact, I think it's becoming irrelevant and insane.
Yes. Yep.
It is difficult. I mean, it is a struggle because, the university system has a lock on so-called authority and a lock on so-called credibility. So it is very difficult to fight about, it is difficult to wage and mount an intellectual life outside of it, especially when you become used to it. So I'm a free market intellectual, and I'm working as a public intellectual who's supporting himself, and that's fine. I want to do that, but I rely on the market, and I appreciate things like this because it isn't easy. I'm not on a sinecure anymore.
No,
I'm no longer.
I know.
It's very interesting, and I'm glad because I'm liberated to be. I'm discovering things that basically you can't see in the university. You just can't see it. You're not allowed to see it. For example, I'm starting a study on the connection between socialism and fascism, and it's very close. I mean, these are kindred things. It's completely denied by the left, and these collectivists are very, very much hand in glove, and it's incredible, the similarities. I mean, it's just unbelievable. So I'm doing that kind of work, and I'm thinking of mounting a study of leftism in the that cuts across all of the different disciplines and all outside of the university as well, that studies the contradictions between the various schools of leftism and inside of the left, what they're denying, and so on and so forth. So I'm trying to mount a really comprehensive study of this.
Michael, it's tremendous, and I want to highly recommend you're the author of 9 books, but I want to recommend especially the last 2. That is, Springtime for Snowflakes, and the one that I think is again one of the great titles I've ever seen, The Google Archipelago.
Thank you.
So, Michael, thanks for coming on the show today, and thanks for all you do. And I didn't mean to imply that you were having an easy time, because I know you're not having an easy time. But you're courageous and you're a fighter, and that's what we need. We need many more people like you, but thank God we have you.
Thank you so much, Lew. It's great to talk to you. and I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, thanks so much for listening to the Lew Rockwell Show today. Take a look at all the podcasts. There have been hundreds of them. There's a link on the LRC front page. Thank you.